Hello, everyone. This is part one of session 9 of Pre-Socratics to Augustine, also called History of Philosophy 1. We are now talking about the Meno. The Meno is a famous dialogue because it contains a quite general puzzle about how inquiry works. But we are not yet getting there in this session. Rather, we are looking at the beginning of the dialogue where Meno, who is Socrates' interlocutor in this dialogue, and Socrates discuss one of those what is X questions, in this case, what is virtue? And they kind of run into so-called aporia, the state of mind where you no longer know, how you can go any further in inquiry. Perplexity is sometimes the translation of aporia. Literally, it means no way out. So you no longer have another way that you can go in inquiry. And that then leads to this puzzle of how inquiry is possible. So Socrates wants to discuss the question, what is virtue? And Meno makes 3 attempts to offer a reply. To back up a little bit, we haven't yet discussed kind of in general the notion of virtue. The Greek term is Aretê. Literally, that means excellence. And even more literally, it means bestness. And you probably know this term from the term aristocracy, which is a kind of form of government, an ancient form of government, where the so-called or presumed best families are those who are in positions of government or rulership. Now, it is kind of part of this aristocratic worldview that you're simply kind of born into those families, which are the best families. And if you're not born into these families, then you don't belong to the people who are best or excellent. And the whole kind of question of what virtue is or what arete is, what excellence is considered a kind of almost rebellious question from the traditionalist point of view, because it presumes that, well, it's just not going to be the case that you are simply excellent by being born into those families. Rather, there's an open question here of what it means to be a good person. And the sophists, we already talked about the sophists, that they claim that they teach you how to become an excellent person. They teach virtue. And you can see why it is that they get kicked out of Athens repeatedly, because that is a kind of rebellious or unconventional claim that you can teach someone to be excellent or best, as opposed to someone simply by birth belonging to those who are best. And both Plato and Socrates, but then also later Aristotle, when they ask, how do we become virtuous, are part of this kind of movement away from a sociological notion of excellence towards a philosophical, ethical, normative notion of excellence, where the question is, how does one become a good person? Now, the answers that Meno gives to the question, what is virtue, are all of them kind of still wedded to this more traditionalist outlook. And today I just want to talk about the first 2 of these answers. The first answer is very famous because it really only refers to the conventional roles that people in Athenian society inhabit. So, virtue for a man is to do such and such. Virtue for a woman is to do such and such. Virtue for a grandparent is to do such and such. Virtue for a child is to do such and such. And Socrates says in reply, you are not telling me the one thing that makes each instance of virtue virtue. Rather, you give me, and this is a famous phrase, a swarm of virtues, many, many, many virtues, rather than the one thing that makes virtue virtue. And that is one flaw of this first reply that Meno gives, but there is a second flaw. Because you might think, well, you could say the social role of the grandparent is to take care of the grandchildren. Let's just stipulate that. But then you can say in response, no, but that's not going to be a compelling instance of virtue or excellence because someone could look after grandchildren and do it badly. And then we're not going to say that that is excellent. So you need to say that the excellence of the grandparent is to look after the grandchildren excellently or well. And that means that your reply ends up being circular because you have the same notion, excellence or goodness, both in that which is to be defined, the definitum, virtue, and in that which defines it, the definiant. So you're saying excellence is to do such and such excellently, or goodness is to do such and such well. And those are circular definitions. The second definition or attempted definition that Meno puts forward is to say, well, virtue is to rule, have power over people or to rule over people. And that immediately runs into the same problem because Socrates says, well, but you can do that well and badly. You're ruling over people, the power to rule over people. If that's going to be what virtue is, you can either, there are lots of bad rulers. If you're not doing that well, then that is not going to count as excellence. So you have the same problem of circularity that you're saying excellence is to do such and such excellently. There are further problems with this proposal, which fails in many ways, but for now I want to focus on one problem that is philosophically quite weighty, both for Plato and for Aristotle. And it connects to the little homework assignment or puzzle that I want to assign today, namely the relationship of virtue and justice. When Meno gives these replies and discusses them with Socrates, he kind of mixes up virtue and justice all the time. Like he almost uses the two notions interchangeably as if it was the same thing. And at some point, Socrates says, hold on, isn't justice a virtue rather than, as you seem to stipulate, simply virtue? And that prompts a complicated and very contentious and interesting discussion. But for now, I just want you to think about the fundamental question, whether it is somehow compelling, possibly quite plausible, to think that justice really is somehow all of virtue. So that Meno would be right in a way to use the two notions interchangeably, or whether that is implausible and at the end of the day, justice simply is one of the virtues. And even more specifically, in the text, there are three options. And so those are the three options for you for the homework assignment. Whether virtue and justice really are the same thing, that is the first option. The second option is that justice is one of the virtues next to other virtues such as moderation or courage. And the third option is that justice is a part of virtue, such that you think of virtue as a whole with parts. So read the text closely and come up with a view on which of these three options seems most plausible to you.